I found the listing late one night, scrolling through Craigslist out of boredom. Roommate wanted, $200 per month, all utilities included. That price was unheard of in my city. The listing was vague, just an address, a single blurry photo of a dimly lit room, and a brief message, looking for someone quiet. Room available immediately. No pets. Something about it unsettled me, but I was desperate. My lease was ending, and I couldn't afford rent on my own anymore. I messaged the contact number listed and got a reply almost instantly. Come by tomorrow at 7 p.m. Bring whatever you need to move in. No interview. No questions. Just an address and an expectation that I would show up ready to stay. I hesitated but ultimately convinced myself it was just an old-fashioned landlord who didn't care for formalities. I agreed and went to bed uneasy. The address led me to an aging brownstone squeezed between modern high-rises. The building looked abandoned. The windows were dark, and the front door was scratched up like someone had clawed at it. I double-checked the address. This was the place. I knocked, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. A man stood in the dim interior. "You're early," he said. His voice was dry, like he hadn't spoken in days. It was 7:02 p.m. He stepped aside, motioning me in. He was tall and gaunt, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. His clothes were clean but outdated, the kind of thing you'd see in photos from the 70s. He had no shoes on. "Your room is at the end of the hall," he said. "Bathrooms to the left. Kitchen's down here." He moved stiffly as he led me through the apartment, the wood floors groaning under our steps. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. Something about the air felt thick, like the place hadn't been ventilated in years. "Who else lives here?" I asked. "Just me," he said. "And you?" I swallowed hard. Something was off about this place, but the price was too good to pass up. I told myself I was being paranoid. That first night, I barely slept. The bed was uncomfortable, the walls too thin. Around 2 a.m., I heard something strange, slow, deliberate footsteps outside my door. They stopped just outside my room. I held my breath, listening. Then, scratching. A slow, rhythmic scraping against the wood. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound continued for another minute before fading away down the hall. The next morning, I asked my roommate about it. "Probably rats," he said flatly. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just stirred his coffee slowly. His fingernails were too long, the skin around them cracked and raw. I laughed nervously, pretending to believe him. But that night, I stuffed a towel under my door and kept the lamp on. A week in, I noticed something odd. The closet in my room wouldn't open. There was no lock, no visible obstruction, but the door wouldn't budge. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise from inside it. A soft shuffle. A breath. I sat up, every muscle in my body tensed. Then, a whisper. A voice, faint and hoarse, rasping from the other side. "Don't let him know." I stumbled out of bed, yanking the door handle, but it still wouldn't move. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I turned back to my bed, and stopped cold. The closet door was open. Inside, nothing. Just a bare, empty space. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I confronted my roommate. "Something's wrong with this place," I said. "That closet. Don't open it again." His voice was sharp, his eyes finally meeting mine. "If you hear something, ignore it. And whatever you do, don't leave your room after midnight." A chill ran through me. "Why?" He just shook his head. "The rent is cheap for a reason." That night, I locked my door. I stayed up, listening. At 12:13 a.m., I heard it. The creak of my door handle turning. A breath on the other side. A whisper, closer this time. He's not the one you should fear. And then, the door clicked open. I stared in horror as the closet door creaked forward, revealing the figure inside. It wasn't my roommate. It was me. Pale, trembling, eyes wide with terror. "Run," my own voice whispered. The lights flickered. The air turned frigid. Behind me, the real roommate began to hum, a low, tuneless melody. I bolted. Through the hall, out the door, into the night. I never went back. I never saw my belongings again. The Craigslist listing vanished the next day. No record of the address existing. No trace of the man. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. A soft whisper in the darkness. He's still looking for a roommate. And I wonder if I ever really left. I never should have answered the ad. It was late, past midnight, when I found it on Craigslist. Room for rent, $250 per month. Utilities included. Must be tidy. The listing had no photos, just an address and a phone number. A deal like that was impossible in my city. I figured it had to be a mistake, or worse, a scam, but I had just lost my job and was weeks away from sleeping in my car. I texted the number. "Come by tomorrow at 6 p.m., the reply came almost immediately. I asked about a security deposit. No response. I should have taken that as a sign, but desperation makes you ignore red flags. The next evening, I showed up at the address, a rundown Victorian house at the end of an overgrown street. It looked abandoned. No lights, no sounds, no sign of life. I hesitated but knocked anyway. The door opened before my knuckles touched the wood. A tall woman stood in the doorway, her face pale and thin, her black dress blending into the shadows behind her. "You're early," she said. I wasn't. It was exactly 6 p.m. She stepped aside without another word, gesturing for me to enter. The house smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. The walls were lined with antique paintings, all of them featuring people staring directly forward with vacant expressions. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I swallowed hard. "Your room is upstairs. Third door on the left," the woman said, already walking away. "Bathroom is at the end of the hall. We don't go into the basement." I frowned. Who's we? But she was gone. That night, I barely slept. The mattress was stiff, the house creaked like it was breathing. Sometime around 3 a.m., I heard it, a slow knock. 3 taps. A pause. 3 more. It was coming from the inside of my closet. My chest tightened. I held my breath. I didn't move. Then, the door handle rattled. I scrambled out of bed and flicked on the light. The closet door stood shut, unmoving. My pulse pounded in my ears. I crept closer, reaching for the handle. My fingers trembled as I pulled it open. Nothing. Just a small, empty space with a single wooden hanger swinging slightly as if it had just been disturbed. I barely slept after that, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I confronted my landlord. "Does someone else live here? I heard something in my closet last night." She stared at me for a long moment before answering. "The house is old. It makes noises. Don't open the closet at night." I tried to argue, but she simply turned and walked away. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere else to go. I convinced myself it was my imagination. But then I started noticing more. The mirrors were always foggy, no matter how many times I wiped them. My reflection seemed off, delayed, like an old TV signal struggling to catch up. The whispers started on the third night, soft, urgent murmurs coming from the vents. I could never quite make out the words, but they made my skin crawl. Then came the scratching. It started in the walls. Soft at first, like mice, but soon it became rhythmic, deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Always at night. Always closer to my bed. One evening, I heard my name. Daniel. I froze. It came from under my bed. I bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob wouldn't turn. I pounded on the wood, screaming. Then the whisper came again, right behind my ear. Daniel. Let me out. I spun around. The closet door was open. I don't remember running. I don't remember grabbing my keys, my phone, anything. I only remember the cold night air hitting my face as I stumbled onto the porch, gasping. I never went back. The next day, I searched for the listing, but it was gone. No record of the address existing. No sign of the woman. It was as if the house had never been there. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear it. Scrape. 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 And I wonder if it's still looking for a new tenant. I should have trusted my gut. It started with a simple ad on Craigslist. One night job, $500 cash. No questions asked. The description was vague, just looking for a responsible individual for overnight monitoring. No company name, no details. Just a phone number. I was desperate for money. My rent was overdue, my fridge was empty, and my car was running on fumes. $500 for one night. Too good to be true, but desperation makes you reckless. I texted the number. The response was immediate. Be at 413, Carver Street at 9 p.m. Come alone. The lack of details made me uneasy, but I convinced myself it was some eccentric rich guy needing a house sitter or security for the night. At worst, I figured I'd be stuck in a boring night shift watching cameras or something. I could handle that. When I arrived, the house was nothing like I expected. It was an old brick building, looming in the dark with only one dim porch light flickering. The windows were boarded up from the inside. There was no car in the driveway, no sign of life. I hesitated, then knocked. The door opened instantly. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall and thin, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit, but something about him felt off. His face was stretched, his smile too wide, his eyes a little too unblinking. You're punctual. That's good, he said in a voice too smooth, like he had rehearsed every word. I swallowed my unease. What's the job? He gestured for me to follow and led me into a dimly lit hallway. The wallpaper was peeling, the air thick with the scent of something metallic. I noticed that every door we passed was locked with heavy bolts. You will sit here, he said, motioning to an old wooden chair in the center of a nearly empty room. A single overhead bulb flickered above. And you will watch the monitor. He pointed to a small, outdated television set on a rickety table. It was already on, displaying a grainy black and white video feed of another room, a small, windowless space containing a single metal door with a sliding latch. What am I watching for? I asked. The man's smile widened. You must not look away. No matter what. My stomach tightened. And if I do? His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to a whisper. You won't. Then he turned and walked out, locking the door behind him. I stared at the monitor, my skin crawling. The room on the screen was empty except for that heavy metal door. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing happened. And then the latch moved. I jolted upright. It wasn't unlocked, but something on the other side had brushed against it. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then the knocking started. Soft at first. Then harder. Rhythmic. Insistent. I gripped the arms of my chair. The knocking turned into scratching. Then a whisper, faint through the static of the monitor. "Let me out." My breath hitched. The voice was distorted, like a recording played backward. "Let me out." My fingers twitched. I wanted to look away, to glance at the door behind me and make sure I was still alone. But I remembered the man's words, "You must not look away." The knocking turned to pounding. The entire screen shook, distorting with static. The voice became a garbled scream. And then, silence. The screen went completely dark. I sat frozen, my hands shaking. I had no idea how much time passed before the door behind me finally creaked open. The man in the suit stepped in, his smile unchanged. "You did well," he said. He handed me an envelope, thick with cash, and gestured for me to leave. My legs felt weak, but I didn't argue. I took the money and stumbled out into the night, gulping fresh air like a drowning man. When I got home, I told myself it was just a weird, rich guy's test. Some psychological experiment. I told myself that, until I checked Craigslist the next night. The ad was up again. Same address. Same job. Same offer. But this time, the description had changed. Looking for a responsible individual for overnight monitoring. Must not break eye contact. Previous employee lasted 5 hours. My stomach turned. I lasted 7.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.